Welcome to the first Salon of the Center for Applied Dialectics. I'm really happy that you're here. Thank all other people also for spreading the word. Today we have a Salon with Rainer and Jackie, and they will be sharing their experience with assessments, cognitive socio-emotional assessments with leaders, senior leaders in organizations, and how they're weaving this into their work as consultants and accompanying the organizations. So thank you very much for coming. All salons should be alive. So on the one hand, we will hear Rainer and Jackie speak, but then there will also be time for breakout groups, for sharing, for exchange, and for applying some elements of what people are bringing into the salon onto ourselves. So thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to the conversation with Rainer, Jackie, and you.
My name is Jackie Thoms, as you can see, and I am a co-founder of Friendly with Rainer. And a few years ago, we started working together and we're looking at what were the ways that we could bring fresh approaches into leadership, knowing that there was really disrupted times that we were in and that the disruptions were only likely to increase and become more. And how could we support leaders with ways of facing these disruptions well? And as we were looking at the different things that we loved in terms of the approaches that we knew and we wanted to develop, we saw that adult development could play a really critical part in supporting leaders to get to know themselves at a very deep level. And really that part is so critical in the sense of, are we capable and ready to look at what is the next stage? How do we move towards it, even if we don't necessarily know exactly what that next stage is? So with that thinking in mind, we looked at Friendly and started to see different ways that we could bring adult development into the core of our services and ways that we could work with clients. So I'll share a slide that will just give you a sense of the many things that we do. This is just what I've talked through, but these are some of the different levels of engagement that we have within Friendly. So we focus, as many organizations do, on the three levels of engagement of individual, teams and organizations, and systems and stakeholders. And our sense is that if we work with individuals at a deep level, then we can start to walk them through different stages of engagement with us. And our hypothesis was that taking leaders into that very deep conversation and relationship through the developmental assessment would start to help us to see the broader system in client organizations and help us to develop relationships at a really profound level that would allow us then to start to partner with them on a longer term rather than just have that single intervention. So as you can see in the individual box in the bottom left-hand corner, we bring developmental assessments and coaching and different practices like constellations and action learning and Bernhard's work, which is around mind openers and really leading and how to support leaders in that field. We also work with teams and organizations and cover areas like team development and culture mapping, which is an interesting one for us as an organization because we brought adult development into the heart of culture mapping to understand what are the different patterns of culture that exist within organizations and what are the stories that we might start to develop to support cultures to evolve and to grow. And then in terms of at the top, whole systems discovery, immunity to change, which is something that some of you will be practiced in and we're engaging in now. And warm data is a very dear practice to all the Friendly practitioners and consultants. Ka and Jeroen have been leading a group at the moment as part of something called Zero Step alongside the UN with the warm data community, and also regenerative practice and how we start to shape different conversations, including sustainability, and hopefully over time we'll move more into that regenerative space. So that gives you a sense of some of the things that Friendly are up to, and I'll pass over to Rainer to talk about Laska and how that has evolved within a little bit of the background and how it's evolved. Would you like a slide right now, or do you want
yes,
just to?
you can move on to the next slide, please. Yeah. Yeah, so what you see here is very symbolic, and we see the abstract art of Ka in these wonderful drawings. And the particularity of Otto Lasker is that he learned with Robert Kegan in Harvard in the 1990s, and he was already in his 50s then and had a background from deep German philosophy, as he was a Frankfurt School person. And what he brought is a combination of deep German idealistic thought with pragmatic American philosophy or psychology, developmental psychology. So there is a very kind of European flavor to it. And what we basically understand with adult development is there is the kind of stage model of an identity as it unfolds in different versions of itself over a lifetime, which is the East Coast kind of American tradition of developmental psychology, where Robert Kegan is one of the eminent scholars and theorists about it. And then Otto, he was very much influenced by modern time dialectics. Roy Bhaskar for him was an important source, and he found that it's not just enough to look into the psychology of the self, but it's also important to look into the ontology of the self. And ontology means kind of to just have a view on thinking as a thought, not necessarily as an expression of an emotion. And he was deciphering thinking and building on the works of people that went into this direction before, like Michael Bassitches. And he was basically making like a table of thought forms. Well, he did a table of thought forms, which is like the periodic system of thinking. So in a way, we can observe how people think, just as a pure observation of thoughts, not necessarily looking into their emotional meaning. So we have basically a sense-making and a meaning-making deciphering in our Lasker tradition of looking into development. So the word dialectic kind of really comes in from having kind of like a double view on the same, or kind of allow ourselves to be in the conflict of opposing views when you look at the same thing in different ways. There's a third element which we are less positive about, positive in a sense that we are not having many models that we say we work with, because there are so many models already, so we have not so much original stuff here. That's the psychological dimension of a person, so the psychological dimension in a more narrow sense. And we often see that in this world of the psychological area, we find blockers for development. And in some really bad cases of our coaching experience, we need to send people to therapy. But actually, in most cases, people are more in the healthy range. And then the two developmental lines of the identity unfolding and the thinking in itself is enough. And what is the advantage of looking into thought is it is more practical in a way than the pure meaning making, in the sense that we can train how people think much easier than we can have people really shift their emotions into a new form of identity. This is less open to agency. So in that sense, having both is very helpful in our work with individuals when we give feedback after assessments. Jackie, shall I talk a bit on how we do assessments, or would you like to say something about this? So we have a rather light approach for the leaders in question, in the sense they don't need to spend so much time in assessment centers or in lengthy questionnaires and so on. We basically ask them to reserve 2 hours of their time for 2 interviews of each 1 hour. One is the interview, which is a subject-object interview for those that know the Kegan work, where we basically allow people to speak about anything that comes up based on a few prompts. And the other is where we basically interview them about their work. So this is easy for leaders to do. They speak about things that are accessible to them. And in this dialogue between the interviewer and the person, we generate a text, obviously. So we record these interviews, and most of the work happens after the interview, when we have a team of scorers that go and analyze these assessment texts. So the assessment is the scoring work to basically analyze the different thought forms that are expressed in the interview about the work. And we look into the different defined stages of the Keegan model when we look into the prompted interview based on, well, different motivators and emotional drivers that people have that express more like what choices are they doing, what makes them taking certain decisions and things like that. Based on which we have a report that we can feed back. So the third investment of the leader is to spend a third hour with the interviewer and get feedback. And this then can very well lead into developmental coaching. Another application is that we use it for recruitment. There is kind of a final stage of selection, and then we speak with the selected candidate or candidates, and then give feedback not only to the person, but also to the hiring managers or the hiring panel, so they can basically validate the decision or we give a few hints on what to pay attention to for the new recruit in their onboarding, kind of how would they land well. And in some really bad cases, we would say, are you really sure? But we haven't had such bad cases yet. So far it was more like supporting people. And the candidates receive that normally pretty well, because for them it feels like very honoring that they get so much attention and they're seen so deeply. That's true for leaders in office as well. Rarely they get this impression of really seen so deeply, and they feel like they're actually understood by someone. And for many leaders, this is a rare experience, to really be understood in a kind of intimate listening way. So listening is the key instrument here. And that is what we also train our colleagues, our interviewers and people that work with us, to really have a very developed listening muscle in their mind when they are ready to perceive the fine nuances in identity development, unfolding, or to distinguish between different thought forms.
Wonderful, thank you, Rainer. I think actually we'll wanted to share with you a case study, or at least a story that reflects a case that we're working with. So I'll share the screen, Rainer, if you wanted
yes,
to.
Please do.
But maybe before we can do that, can just pause a moment and just see if there are any questions, because
that would be cool.
I appreciate there's maybe some terms that are unfamiliar or maybe something unclear, but we'd welcome questions if there are any.
In any practical case, we are establishing a relationship between the manager and us interviewing them. So we are coming back with the size of person concept after 2 deep interviews where we already know each other. So in that sense, we give the person back the size that they already have. That is because we've analyzed it all thoroughly. So in a way, normally people receive very well who they are. So if we do our job properly, we are not coming with things people would not be readily accepting, because this is what they have expressed in the first place. The more delicate feedback is when we compare the actual size of person with the size of the role, and there might be some inconvenient insights in the sense that the role might be much larger than the current size as a person, and then adaptations might be recommended. And this is then when, or coaching might be just enough to do the stretch, but in some awkward cases, it might be, the bad news might be that size of person and size of role would not fit. But what we, in a narrower sense, understand with size of person has much to do with the social, emotional, meaning-making capacity, which is kind of like measuring like a size. in thinking, the term size is maybe a bit more misleading. Kind of Otto Lasker uses the term fluidity of thought, in a sense that if people use a whole variety of thought forms, their thinking capacity is more evolved or more differentiated. I think it's a better term to express that sort of line of development than assuming that someone is kind of better or whatever because they use a certain thought form that others don't. It's more like that people just hold a certain capacity, like we have people that are much better at a certain craft than others. So in that sense, you have a comparison. It's in our work as knowledge workers and as decision makers that, of course, the craft of thinking is super important. So it's not just any craft that we are looking into.
And I just wanted to respond to Thomas's question in the chat that we are working, as Jeroen and I wrote, with the 28 thought forms. But for others, Eva Vidalia, who was here a moment ago, I'm not sure if she still is now. I can't see her on the screen, but she worked deeply with Otto Lasker.
She is.
Here, I can't, sorry, it's Zoom. It's such a nightmare. You lose people. Apologies, Eva. But Eva has worked for years in depth with this work and has created a 12 thought form framework to make it a little bit more accessible. So I just wanted to mention that.
So I would like to present to you one case that we are working with. It's a current case, so allow me not to mention the name of the company. Yeah, but you see the case here. So we are working with a technology company in Germany. They are not yet completely regenerative. So Car was adding a little adjective, which is exactly the process they're in. So they're very much in tech, meaning hardware and software. And their market is about to change dramatically. So they had a very hard time behind them. They were kind of needing constantly to save costs and getting more lean year after year. And now the market will be expanding and they're just needing to shift gears and to grow again after they had been shrinking. And they also need to be super innovative with new products all the time because they have a very fierce competition. So what they had been focusing on over the last years was to be very kind of industrial, in a sense to really be very excellent in producing outputs with less and less cost and with a high level of predictability in the production front, and have rather zero-fault kind of company running, which is a certain kind of linear kind of mindset that is the one that was very dominant in the 20th century. And what they lost a bit and now found that they need to gain it back in a new way is an innovative and creative capacity to be present as a culture in their organization and available, not just for leaders, but for most of the staff. So that is the situation we got in. We were first found by one of their scouts for talent who learned with us. And while this person was already leaving the organization, finally the senior leadership hired us in. So we kind of, the first scout was already kind of feeling like, okay, that was enough, I need to move on. And the leadership started working with us and we started working with them. Like it always is in consulting, we first had a presenting issue to deal with, like how can our team work better together? But for us, one of our principles is that teams that are there to work together, they find alignment by aligning the work rather than by having nice words with each other or learning nonviolent communication or other very important good communication tools. But let's also look at what you're actually doing together and how that aligns. And typically this solves 80% of all potential frictions and conflicts and so on, because there is a material base behind them. So let's look at that. So which we did, and so we had two retreats with them. One was more like how can we work better together and how do we learn to be also a bit more conflictual and speak about the real issues. And in the second retreat, people were really about what is our strategy, how do we lead this company, what are we really going here? And then we felt like, okay, now we are warm, we really work kind of the friendly way with them. And we are now in a phase where we have introduced assessments in between the two meetings. So we started as coaching with a few members of the team that were shown and presented themselves as really critical. So we have now assessed 3 of 6 of the senior team members, and we are coaching all 3, and we are working with the 2 really core business leaders from the senior team to now step into the next level of the organization and work with teams that have in their hands to really implement the new strategy. So this is a classical organizational development design that we have, in the sense that we are beginning with a strategic orientation and then accompany people with critical competencies or critical roles in the organization in their systemic change. Now, the development of the persons and we see the development of the individual as a key component here, not just to work with them one-on-one like we would have done even if we would not know about assessments. It's just that the way we did the assessments allows us to be very precise with these individuals and to really talk to them in a kind of intimate way from inside out, because we know what's going on inside them through the assessments. And yeah, we might at some stage start doing the culture mapping with them, because this is kind of a critical dimension in this case, because they want to shift the culture. So culture mapping would work that we invite people into story workshops, so where people are sharing success moments of their current work. And we will play back these story workshops to the organization through probably an intranet survey, where people read stories that colleagues have told, and they can identify with those stories that they feel attracted to for themselves. And this will create a map of the individuals as much as we can map this against the functions that the organization has and see what is a required culture for certain important functions, so that something like talent development, in-house recruitment, learning, training, recruitment from outside, and so on can all be informed by the requisite culture that the organization has in the future. So that is what we will start first on the pilot level with one area of the organization, and this is what we are just getting ready for with this client. Yeah, maybe any questions about how we work with organizations would be welcome as well. Well, our experience with teams is that there are often issues that people make very personal, like I can't work with this colleague there. When they start speaking, I get like a nervous reaction in my guts, and so on and so on. We take this as a symptom, not as the actual issue. Meaning that once we listen to everyone in the team, we might understand that the other person has a certain reason why they make a certain point again and again and again, and the other person has a certain reason why they don't like the other person making this point, and that in most cases has nothing to do with the personal lack of sympathy or understanding of the other person, but has to do very much with certain business issues and different perception of priorities and things like that. So basically we can kind of address most team issues the moment we get people to express the more underlying business issues that are present. And when they get to surface, typically many antagonisms and tensions in teams just disappear like fog when the sun comes through. And then remaining personal issues tend to be not so heavy and actually become like nice, because all of a sudden people start becoming friends who were before always the antagonists in the company and so on. So that's kind of what I mean with that. So we don't psychologize conflict. So that's what I want to say, Paulo. Well, one of our clients is kind of leading an important part of the business and has a very core role there. So the limits of that person is limiting the whole business in a way. So in that sense, pointing to the person where they have limits and working with them at this edge of development is at the same time allowing out of a sudden that their communication with their next level of team members starts shifting. And this is indeed what I'm observing in the coaching now with the person. and where there is a whole reorganization now starting, and there is the whole next team out of a sudden is now what we work with. And without the assessment, it might have taken a year longer for the person to get there and wanting to do it. Kind of, they felt stuck with this first. So this is a sort of difference it makes. So for the person, out of a sudden, it becomes very specific, and they understand how they themselves are the enabling or eventually limiting factor for certain developments to happen. You're spot on. I mean, the change is not us to do. We are accompanying people in their struggles. And if there is no openness for change, then the struggle is kind of under the lid and it will not open up. And then it's a conflict that's not ours to take on. So we are not replacing the leaders of the organization, and we are not firing any of our clients. So if such decisions have to be made, we have this also as part of our client system. And if we are asked for advice, we might, in some radical cases, point to limitations we see with some of our managers in the team. And this is then typically shared with both sides, not just with one. So in that sense, we make certain tensions more visible that otherwise people might not see. And assessments help to have like a basis for them and really make things personal where they are. Because if the capability is not with the person, there is a personal issue with it, which we make in a way objective through the assessments. And we are not blaming anyone for a capacity they don't have. We are rather making visible that there is a lack of capability for a certain requirement, and then it's up for everyone involved to find the best adjustment for it. Yeah, well, in high pressure situations, people not always can invest so much patience into people to move if the gap is really big. So it really depends on the circumstance and the context. So we cannot give any absolute things here. So the big tension is always when size of person and size of role show a big gap. The size of person in itself is not a problem. There's always potential to move on, and we have our whole lifetime to grow as far as we can. So that is not problematic at all. The thing is the situation in which a person is found and the pressures they are exposed to from others who want them to perform maybe at levels they can't. Only then we have a real problem.
So I think we'll move on at the moment. Bernhard was really keen that we created some conversation and interaction between the group. And so we thought that we would invite you into a small or a conversation where you could actually have an experience of development. And so what we will do is we'll set up groups in trios in the breakout rooms, which I hope Bernhard will be on the case with. And we'll have a look at these questions, which I've just put in the chat window. So if you think of something 10 years ago that you were struggling with or grappling to embrace that is now easy for you, what is that? So something that was difficult, something you were struggling to be able to do 10 years ago, and now it's easy for you, what is that? So you can take a moment to think about that and ponder what that might be. And then think about what changed. So what do you notice was the change? And then what made that change possible? And what we'll do.
If you want to learn more about what we have introduced here very condensedly, very briefly, this is something to unpack over many sessions over Zoom, well, not too many, just a few. And we want to invite you, as you have been on this webinar, to join our next upcoming training and in these methods with even a discount that you can apply right away. And Jeroen has prepared this, who is our learning manager, to for you to join and be in the Zoom room with Randy, and to learn about the theories and the approaches, and do practice moments like we just had here. So these foundations training is open. Great, there's a link, just see it, and you might sign up right now or tomorrow for the discount. And don't want to rush you as well, so take your time if you like. And we are very happy to extend also our web of collaborators. The work that we are doing has attracted more and more interest, so our scoring team needs reinforcement. And if you like to learn the tools and the practice and want to join us afterwards, this is the path. So in that sense, I will now end our little commercial part and hand back to Jackie and Bernhard. Thank you.
As a weaver, that's apparently my role here in CAD, in CAD, in the Center for Applied Dialectics. First, I want to thank you for coming. If you're okay, we will add you to the mailing list of CAD. So, and if you haven't shared your email address via the Friendly newsletter, please send me an email or leave your email address in the chat so that I can add you to the mailing list. The next Salon will be on June the 22nd, where it's about mind-opening dialogue, where I will be sharing something. And I'm eager to have your feedback and your remarks, how we can improve this mind-opening dialogue approach. We have this series of salons, so we have this now in May, the next one is in June 22nd. Nick Shannon will be sharing on September 21st, and Jan de Wisch will be sharing on November 23rd. So there is a slot available in October if you want, and also next year. So whoever wants to share something in this community, please get in contact if you think that others can learn from you and that you can also learn from kind of feedback and questions. So please get in contact with us and let us grow this community together. The culture that I hope to introduce here in this center is that it's a community of practitioners, that meetings always start at the same time, and that we can, if you want, meet up to half an hour early. So you can join half an hour early in the room. The room will be open, I will be there. And if there are more than 3-4 people, we can go already into breakout groups and have some nice conversations. And also after the official end now, after we will be ending, also the room will be open for another 30 minutes. So if we want, we can have dialogues here, which I've always find are one of the most interesting parts, right? When we're sitting together, having coffee and having one-to-one or other closer conversations. Thank you very much for coming. Hoping to see you soon next time.